So I recently had to explain the talk to a colleague who hadn't heard of the concept. That this was precipitated by me having parts of the talk with a young Black student. Um, and so I explained the talk as in examples. I felt as if I needed to give concrete examples for this person to understand what I was talking about. And it was difficult because I started to see things like, in the wake of all the police shootings in America, for example, a lot of public talk about the talk has been about, how do you deal with a police officer when you're stopped, a stop and search. So dealing with stop and search and anti-stop and search movements have spread, certainly here in the UK, stemming from, I think, what went on in New York City, for example, and certainly the LA police force. So in the wake of all the police murders, and I won't go through all the different Trayvon Martins and argue like how justifiable it was to take this or that particular Black life. Because from the perspective of parents, no matter how you may value or we may discuss the value of a particular Black life, that person has innate value to their parents. And so the talk stems from that perspective, first of all, that you have an older Black person who cares for the younger Black person to whom they're giving the talk. And it is a talk, it's not per se a dialogue, but it is I'm a Black person. Stop, young Black person. You need to know, like, this is how you deal with white people. And I guess that's what ultimately the talk comes down to is how do you not scare white people? Parts of the talk, for example, I have to deal with our bodies, not just our bodies as sexual beings. And that, of course, is also part of the talk of how do you have a big Black bottom in a big white world, knowing that our bodies are so easily sexualized and rendered licentious. And is it part of a justifying white supremacy? And that's also part of the talk. Is ultimately the objective of the talk is to allow the person who's listening to objectify white supremacy and not internalize it. I'll get back to that at the end. But what I was saying about the body. So there's the sexualized version of the body, but then there's also the acceptance, and that's where really the talk is not just one talk, but it's a lifetime, perhaps of us working with one another in dialogue to say, hey, you're beautiful just the way you are, So it's me, for example, in the airport just the other day, I had the opportunity to compliment a Black woman. I was there in France catching the Eurostar back here to the UK. And there was an attendant, a Black woman, at one of the duty-free shops, and she just had a look short, quite natural, da da da. And after, the woman I was with had done the exchange and purchased from the shop, I just said, I really like your hair, it's beautiful. And, she just blew up and glowed and, I love your hair, my hair's like your hair and all this kind of stuff. But that is to say that because our bodies are under such attack and such particular scrutiny as the Black other, and that's ultimately one of the questions that my colleague had is Blackness particularly oppressed? Why are we talking about how the talk and how oppressed or how we must externalize whiteness and not internalize whiteness, as it were, is a particular kind of problem? Well, for us, what I can say as a matter of the talk, that becomes not essential, because we're not talking about relatively how important is Black oppression as compared to Asian or Irish oppression, for example. But the talk is a particular perspective from, as I said, a senior Black person, a Black person who's lived a little bit longer than the younger Black person. And it's saying, your Black body matters. Your Black body matters. And so all of those other kinds of questions become immaterial. And this is why it's so interesting that the talk is also able to be more expedient than explaining what the talk is. So I have this big long video here reflecting on having to talk about the talk and explain the talk and describe the talk. And yet when you're actually just having the talk, you kind of just have it. You might need to sort of introduce to the young Black person, well, I'm going to tell you a few things about, from my own experience, from the first person, like, you need to know this. And you see this, the talk in pop culture, is not just Ta-Nehisi Coates' book and subsequent articles in The Atlantic all around this. And this is what I would recommend that anyone read who is similarly having this struggle, being a Black person, having to, in a dominant white environment, having to kind of describe and talk about aspects of Blackness. Those articles have been really helpful. Of course, there are always bell hooks books, particularly Teaching to Transgress, and then the manual that she has about it, teaching critical thinking. And so those are really great resources that would really help on all sides for us to understand, because remember, I'm talking about the talk to someone who, is perhaps surrounded by Black people in their environment, but hadn't really been aware at all that this is a kind of narrative that we have amongst us as Black people. I mean, I'm saying that we live such segregated lives because this is something that's integral to Black people. I think I purposefully didn't introduce the talk when I just began this video, and I just sort of dove into it because I wanted viewers, you, to have to think, is he talking about, yes, I'm talking about that talk. And if you didn't know which talk I was talking about, well, it is a life or death kind of thing, but it also is against soul murder, what bell hooks calls soul murder. There's a unique emphasis on understanding the dominant gaze. So developing an oppositional gaze. So that's ultimately what the talk is. As I said, it's about externalizing the dominant white hegemonic gaze of Blackness, of one's sexuality, of one's body, of one's identities, of one's being. And so more than just teaching someone, how do you respond when you're stopped and frisked by the police? And how do you respond? Keep your hands to, or how do you, literally, how many people have gone on the comments of all the articles about Walter Scott, about Trayvon Martin, about any of these young Black people who've just been murdered, about seeing the video of the guy running away from the police and getting shot in the back, or seeing the video of the guy being stopped at a gas station, told to, get his ID. He turns around to get his ID, and then the cop shoots him, and he's screaming, "Why did you shoot me?" You see enough of those videos, and you try and pick apart each one. What did he do, and what did he do, to make the officer feel threatened? But part of the talk is understanding that Blackness is threatening, like your Black body and their presence, is a threat. And to understand how that cannot sadden you, and yet you must be aware, how that cannot dominate your thinking about the world, and yet you must be vigilantly aware of it. And so part of the talk is saying you need to be proud and self-determining. Amen.